My name is Hildur Pálsdóttir, if you don't know me, and I want to welcome you to this space tonight. Thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. And this meeting, I should start with this, will be recorded. So if you speak up, we cannot edit out your contribution afterwards, but you can connect with us anonymously directly through the chat. There will be an interactive part where we will be in conversation, but this session tonight is a keynote, is a lecture with Dan Raichel, who will be really speaking with us about the science, the public health risks, and how to regulate certain pesticides. But first, I would like to mention I'm here tonight on behalf of Transition Town Port Washington for this second session. We have 3 sessions left of this year's climate action series in collaboration with Landmark on Main Street. At Transition Town Port Washington, we are committed to decarbonizing the power grid and freeing our community from fossil fuel energy dependency, while encouraging regeneration and recovery. This means facilitating a cultural shift of sorts, a shift in habit away from extraction, away from excess use and land abuse, while transitioning towards reducing consumption and supporting regeneration, rewilding, and restoration of ecosystems. And with that, support biodiversity. In that way, we can together create a truly resilient and sustainable community. We are local in Port Washington, but we belong to a global community of change makers. There are over 1,000 transition towns worldwide, and we are a movement of communities coming together to reimagine, rebuild our world. 2 weeks ago, we had the Shinnecock kelp farmers and the Neonic Land Trust here in a session dedicated to saving the shoreline. The recording of this session is available on the YouTube channel of Landmark on Main Street, and I will put that in the chat in a bit. But just wanted to make sure you know that in 2 weeks, we'll have Paul Merkelson and Claire Treves-Bressel here with Monique Fitzgerald from Blark and the Scarsdale Sustainability Committee will be there as well. And it's worth saving the date. Food scraps are the solution. And on Tuesday, June 7th, same time, 7:30 p.m., Margaret Galbraith and Heinz will be discussing the applications of green infrastructure and adapting to climate change. But tonight we are here, we're going to focus on the little things who make the world and why biodiversity should matter to us all. And at first here, I want to invite my friend Heinz to read the Land Acknowledgement as is customary in our meetings.
Thank you, Hildur. Acknowledging indigenous land is the first step in taking better care of it. Through the world, indigenous peoples are on the front lines of the climate crisis while also confronting colonialism, racism, and disenfranchisement in the past and the present. This land in Port Washington we meet on this evening, the northwestern part of Long Island, has for thousands of years been lived in and loved by indigenous peoples, most recently the Matinacock tribal nation. It is thus in the spirit of truth and equity and with gratitude and appreciation and humility that we acknowledge to live on the sacred homelands of the Matinacock tribal nation, who are with the other 12 tribes the original stewards of this island. Today, due to forced removal, theft, genocide, and broken treaties, the community resides in various parts of the USA and Long Island. We honor and pay respect to their ancestors, past and present, as well as to future generations, and we recognize their continuing presence in their homelands. We understand that our acknowledgement requires those of us who are settlers, land and homeowners, to recognize our own place in and responsibilities towards addressing inequity, and that this ongoing and challenging work requires that we commit to real engagement with the Matinecock tribal nation communities and all other indigenous communities on Long Island to build an inclusive and equitable space for all. May the ancient knowing this land holds of human interconnection with nature awaken our hearts to this same encoding of deep relationship. And may we realize that human rights and nature's rights are deeply connected and have to be realized to maintain livable habitats for all. Before I give the word back to Hildur, I would like to read a quote from the great American naturalist, entomologist, and sociobiologist Edward Osborne Wilson, who wrote, quote, "I turned to the teeming small creatures that can be held between the thumb and forefinger, the little things that compose the foundation of our ecosystems, the little things, as I like to say, who run the world." End of quote.
Yes, we are here to discuss how to support the little things who run the world. And at risk of mispronouncing your name, I'll try again, Daniel. We're here with Dan Raichel. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. An acting director of the Natural Resources Defense Council's Pollinator Initiative. And we're so pleased that you took the time to be with us tonight, and really grateful for the technology of Zoom, as the technology of Zoom allows us to be here with you in this way. You focus on protecting our nation's bee population from the ever-growing threats to their health and existence, in particular, the use of bee toxic pesticides. And before, I should mention, before joining the Pollinator Initiative, Raichel was the co-director of NRDC's Community Fracking Defense Project and an advocate for the cleanup of industrial pollution in the New York region. So welcome back to New York in this way. Let's begin.
Well, thanks everyone for having me. As Hildur mentioned, my name is Dan Raichel. I'm acting director of NRDC's Pollinator Initiative. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about neonicotinoid pesticides. You might have heard of them before, or maybe not. You might know them as Neonics. And also just a really amazing and common sense piece of legislation that is right now in the New York legislature, and something that we can all do something about in the next 3 weeks to get it into law. And it's a really leading piece of legislation. But to start with the little things, and that's a great quote, let's start with a little thing that we are all familiar with, the humble honeybee. So I think everyone in this group probably knows that bees are important. 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we take come from pollination provided by bees and other pollinating animals known as pollinators. So to give you a sense of what that looks like, here is your typical grocery store in today's world, the world with bees and other pollinators. And here's what that grocery store would look like in a world without bees. So certainly there would still be food, but we would have a lot less of it. A lot of our most nutritious options would be gone. A lot of the most delicious options would be gone too. And the remaining food, because there's less of it, and I know this is a time of inflation, so we're all familiar with this, When we have less food, all of it would be more expensive. And even some of the crops that don't directly depend on pollination, they're benefited by it. So it would really be a tragedy for our food system and food security. Beyond just food, bees and other pollinators are responsible for pollinating most of the plant life on the face of the earth. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of vascular plants, that's most plants besides things like moss, on the face of the earth require bees and other pollinators to reproduce. So if we see losses of bees and other pollinators, we see not only food security issues, but also the collapse of whole ecosystems. And that's basically what we're worried about. So around 15 years ago, or well, maybe closer to 17 now, beekeepers in New York and across the country started seeing their annual losses of honeybee colonies jump through the roof, going from about 10, 15% a year to 30, 40, 50% a year virtually overnight. And those losses have maintained to this day. Actually, last year was the second worst year for beekeepers, both in New York and nationwide. And something interesting has been happening in these last several years too with losses. It used to be that beekeepers only lost their bees in the wintertime. As you can see in the late aughts there, only winter losses were counted. But recently there have been years where the summer losses have been higher than the winter losses. People are losing bees at a time when people don't or hadn't historically lost bee colonies. So this is sort of an indicator that something was wrong. And it's not just wrong with honeybees. So honeybees, we know they make honey, but most bees do not make honey. They don't live in colonies. There are 400 plus species of native bees in New York alone, several thousand in the United States. And this is a picture of the rusty patch bumblebee. It was common in New York as recently as the mid-1990s, but hasn't been seen in New York in quite a while. The bee lost 90% of its habitat range and became the first bee in the continental United States to be placed on the endangered species list. So we count honeybees. Honeybees are essentially livestock. They're replenished every year. They're bred and replenished. Wild bees, not so much. We don't count them as frequently. There's no breeding industry to replace their populations when they're gone. They are important crop pollinators. They are important to ecosystems. And we know through a few examples, and the rusty patch is one of them, that they're in big trouble too. Beyond bees, right? We know that there is a vast hollowing out of insect life in the world. There was actually just a study that came out in England this month. And there have been studies in Germany and other places across the globe showing that the mass of flying insects, of total insects, is going down. Now this title here might be a little hyperbolic. This is from the New York Magazine. Some insects are not going anywhere. So if you like cockroaches, you're in luck. But we are losing a great mass of diversity, of insect diversity. And again, a lot of these insects are really critical to our ecosystems, pollinators being sort of the keystone species. So, what's happening, right? Where are all the bugs going? Well, there's a lot of causes, certainly. It's not just one cause. Climate change is absolutely a factor. So is the loss of habitat to urban and suburban sprawl, and also monoculture agriculture that sort of crowds out all other plant life. Parasites, pathogens are a problem. These are a picture, I don't know if you can see them, these little dots right here, those are varroa mite. This is a disease of honeybees, not so much of other bees, but this is a parasite. It's been around in New York since the 1980s. And here's a picture of a couple of varroa mite literally, sucking the life out of a honeybee. But first and foremost in our mind is the use of pesticides, and in particular, a class of insecticides known as the neonicotinoids. So what are neonicotinoids? They are neurotoxic insecticides, which means they are pesticides designed to kill bugs by attacking their nervous system. And there are three big problems with neonics. The first is that neonics are super duper toxic to insects. So these are among the most toxic, insect toxic pesticides mankind has ever created. They, just one neonic treated corn seed can have enough active ingredient to kill 250,000 bees, just to give you a sense of scale. And here's the chart that's very important, right? So a study was done showing that these pesticides have made US agriculture 48 times more harmful to insect life since their introduction. And look right here, where does that harmfulness really start to spike up and just take off? About the same time that we see mass losses in honeybee colonies. And this is sort of like the you know, I know this is a climate change group, so this is like the hockey stick graph. This is the only stressor among all of these other parasites, climate change, etc., that maps really well with that sudden spike in losses that we see with honeybees, again, exactly at that time. Second problem with neonics is that they are very good at contaminating whole ecosystems. So they are designed to permeate plants. They're known as systemic pesticides. They get into the system of the plant, the leaves, the roots, the fruit, the pollen, the nectar, everything. They infuse the plant, making it toxic to insects, meaning they make the plant itself, in a way, the pesticide. And that means they can be applied in all sorts of interesting ways. They, of course, can be sprayed like older conventional pesticides, but they can also be applied to soil or literally painted on crop seeds. And here is a picture of some neonic treated corn seed. I can give folks a close-up here. They don't always choose the same color. Different companies like different colors for their neonic treatments, but they are required to colorize them to show that there's a pesticide on the seed. And the idea is, as that seed is growing into a plant, it literally soaks up the pesticide coating through its roots and becomes toxic. The problem is only 2 to 5% of that coating actually makes it into the plant that it's intended to go to. The other 95+% stay in the soil where it persists for years. And those same properties that let it get up into the plant, namely its water solubility, means that anytime it rains, anytime there's irrigation, lawn watering, whatever, those neonics are moving through the soil. They're contaminating new soil. If there are wild plants in that new soil, those plants soak up the pesticides through their roots. Their pollen, their nectar becomes toxic. If there's a water supply nearby, that water supply becomes contaminated, and that's particularly relevant on Long Island. And just note that this is, you know, a picture of a crop diagram of agriculture. Works the same way with lawn applications, right? You put granules on your lawn, you water them in, and same idea, that they literally soak into your lawn. Third issue with neonics is that they are just all over the place. So up to 100% of conventional corn is pre-treated with a neonic on the seed. Soybeans, 50 to 75% of those soybean seeds. So in New York, you're already talking well over 1 million acres, but they are also all over lawns, gardens, golf courses, you name it. And we know that the use in New York has been going up and up and up. 2014 is the last year we have good data for. And I want to bring everybody's attention to this little red square right here on the 2014. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that is the use of a neonic called imidacloprid. And notice it's not even the most used pesticide, most used neonic in New York. So here's another graph of imidacloprid use. Again, this is just imidacloprid, and you can see how it coats the country, 2014 being the last year we have good data for. And this is just agricultural use. And imidacloprid is used a lot in lawns, gardens, golf courses. So a lot of those white areas that you see there, including on Long Island, would be pretty well filled in if it counted those non-agricultural uses too. And note too that this is just one of 5 neonics used in New York, and not even the most used one. What it gives you a sense is that these pesticides are used over a vast area. They're used year after year after year in the same places, which means because they persist for years and leave most of their ingredient in the soil, that you have a buildup of toxicity in the soil that is constantly expanding every time it rains. Now, we see this in New York water, and Long Island, I'm afraid to say, is the poster child for it. State and federal water testing shows that neonics are frequently in New York surface waters. They're at levels that are above EPA levels for harms to aquatic ecosystems. And they're in about a third of Long Island groundwater samples. They're actually, I believe, either the most or among the most detected pesticides in the Long Island aquifer, and that's not a surprise. That's, you know, they're very water soluble, so it's not a surprise that we see so much in that aquifer. It's also worth noting that most tests for neonics are not testing for all five. Again, they're just testing for imidacloprid. So the results that we see, as scary as they are likely a vast underestimate, because imidacloprid, again, is not even the most used neonic in New York State. This is a concern for drinking water. I'm going to get into human health and some other concerns with these pesticides in a bit, but just know that chlorination treatment does not remove neonics from water. Only granular active carbon filtration does. Most water supplies do not use carbon filtration. Certainly New York City and Syracuse have unfiltered water supplies, so they're at particular risk. Long Island groundwater users are at risk. And again, any water system that's not using this filtration. And I know that at least in Suffolk County, where they do test for this in finished drinking water, you do see neonics in finished drinking water, although most water systems don't do that testing. Okay, so there are a whole lot of impacts from what we see with this neonic contamination, right? And the water testing is sort of the indicator that something's wrong, right? We're seeing it in the water, but that means it's all over the environment. So what is the impact of this vast contamination that we see? Well, it's absolutely confirmed that neonics are driving bee and pollinator population losses. There was some debate 15 years ago. There is no longer a debate. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of studies on this, and including a real amazing report from Cornell University that came out a couple of years ago. So again, the link there is not just to the beekeeper losses, the honeybees, but also our wild bee species. And there are climate implications of that as well. Actually, I don't have the other bullet here on my slide, but it's not just bees, it's also beneficial insects in the soil decomposers, and also the microbial community within soils. And I think that they're not quite there yet in terms of linking neonics with effects on carbon sequestration, but I bet you as the science comes out, these multiple impacts that we see, not just to bees, but also other insect communities and soil health, will increasingly make that connection. But beyond bees, we are getting science on a wide range of effects. So birds, for instance, there are a number of studies connecting bird losses, including the 30% loss of North American birds that we saw in the last 15 years, to neonic pesticide use. And there's a couple of ways that happens. First, as you might imagine, you know, as described, neonics are hollowing out our ecosystems from the bottom up. And the anecdote that I sometimes use is the Windscreen Test. You know, if you were driving through a rural area in New York or elsewhere in the mid-90s, in August, you'd have to put your windshield wipers on whether it was raining or not, just to get all the bugs off of your windshield. Think about when the last time was that you really had to do that, right? And so this is that hollowing out that we see. And as it turns out, a lot of animals eat bugs, birds being chief among them. So if you have fewer bugs, you start to see fewer birds and a decline in bird biodiversity. It's also worth noting that neonics are directly toxic to birds. So just one neonic treated seed has enough active ingredient to kill a small songbird. And at levels less than lethal, it can affect the bird's ability to reproduce, their immune system, their ability to put on weight during migration, their ability to navigate and to forage for food, so neurological effects. So all sorts of problems short of death that it could ultimately lead to the death of that bird or that bird population. Fish, similar to, you know, what we see with birds. So these neonics get into water supplies, and actually there's a concern for marine environments. There's a concern for the Long Island Sound as well. And there was a good study in Japan that was looking at zooplankton. Sorry, I put my slide in the wrong place. These are zooplankton, and that study was measuring them, you know, dating back to the 1980s. And in the early 90s, they see that zooplankton population just hit a wall and just drop off. And at the same time, they see the species of fish that ate those essentially water bugs also hit a wall. And there was a lot of confusion as to what that was caused by it, but the study authors later linked it to the introduction of neonics in nearby agriculture. And this is a really interesting study because we can't go back in time and get data from the world before neonics, but this is one of the few cases where we have that data. And this was literally the first introduction of neonics in agriculture in that area. These are some of the first ever being used in the early 90s. It's important to note too that there are other connections to direct harms, so including in mammals. So this is a study on white-tailed deer linking neonic exposures to birth defects in the deer. And the effects that we're seeing are deformed jaws, decreased organ weights, and increased mortality in deer fawns. And this study sort of grew out of hunters seeing strange things in the wild. There was a concern that it was connected to neonic pesticide use. They did a controlled study feeding deer sort of realistic levels of neonics that they would encounter in the wild, and they found these effects. And later, they actually measured levels in deer in the wild and found that actually in the wild, these levels of neonics were in their bodies that were associated with these impacts. So deer are large mammals, we're large mammals. We know if something is affecting deer, it's probably affecting us too. And the studies that we have, even though they're sort of more emerging now, and actually we just got a bunch of them very recently, neonic exposure is linked or in the womb to autism-like symptoms and birth defects of the developing heart and brain in people. That is consistent with what we see in the animal studies. So rat studies showing neonics exposure in the womb being associated with thinner areas of the cortex. And CDC monitoring shows actually that on any given day, about half the American population has neonics in their bodies. And that data, so that first bullet there, the data was released in 2019. This is part of CDC's sort of regular monitoring for toxins. And we're now beginning to get studies looking at that data and looking at associations. So there was a whole slew of studies that just came out finding new impacts from neonics, including on testosterone, insulin regulation in the body, and actually different sorts of effects on weight gain and obesity. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. I think what health experts have seen, and there's been a number of health experts that have raised alarms in New York and across the country. What we know about these pesticides is that they are neurotoxic. They're designed to target nerves in insect cells, but we have the same nerve sites in our bodies. It's actually the ones that pick up nicotine. And that's where the name neonicotinoid comes from. It's a new nicotine-like substance. And so like lead, like mercury, like other materials that are neurotoxic, there may not be a safe level when it comes to neonics, again, because they're so targeted to do damage to our nerves. So you add all of this together and it looks a whole lot like Silent Spring. People have been saying that about neonics for a long time. I always thought it was a little hyperbolic, but the more science we get on these pesticides, the more we are learning that they really are hollowing out the environment. They really are in our daily lives. They're in our bodies. There are impacts to our health, or there are threats to our health, and threats to ecosystems. So it really starts to look like what Rachel Carson was talking about. And for those who don't know Silent Spring, it's the seminal 1960s book that sort of kicked off the environmental movement, asking folks to imagine a spring where there is no birdsong, where there is no chirping insects, buzzing bees, and where our own bodies are poisoned by wasteful pesticide use. So, okay, that's all the bad stuff. What are folks doing about it? In the European Union, the EU has banned sort of the major neonic chemicals, the three big ones. France has banned all of them, and Quebec and Ontario are phasing out a use of neonic treated seeds, which is great. In the US, EPA is a little bit asleep at the wheel. They issued a decision under the Trump administration that basically allowed neonics to continue to be used business as usual. We anticipate that EPA is likely to finalize that decision soon, so likely not much happening at the federal level. Although there are some states that have recently taken action. New Jersey and Maine have banned neonic use on non-agricultural areas, which, as you might imagine, in New Jersey is most places. It's a very heavily urban, suburban state. And other states have taken action to make neonics restricted use, which is good. It basically takes them off of store shelves, but still allows use by landscapers and in agriculture. What's happening in New York is, I think, sort of the most key here. New York has the opportunity to be a real leader on the neonic issue. There's a bill right now in the legislature, the Birds and Bees Protection Act, and it's based on a massive study from Cornell University, which I mentioned earlier, came out in June 2020, looked at over 1,100 peer-reviewed papers. This is a massive literature review. And basically everything that had been written on neonics and pollinators to date at that time. And they found two key things. The first is that the neonic-treated corn, soybean, and wheat seeds, which account for about 3/4 of the neonic use in New York agriculture, pose big risks to bees, and we know water, wildlife, et cetera. That wasn't covered in the report. But they provide no overall net income benefit to farmers. So to break that down a little bit more, very rarely do they provide a yield benefit, but even when they do, if you factor the extra cost of having the pesticide on the seed versus the benefit, economically, it's a wash. And actually, there's been a number of studies since this Cornell report has come out, big multi-year studies that have found there's no benefit to using these treated seeds. Another big find is that the turf and ornamental uses, so think lawns and gardens, where these pesticides are used at much higher rates per acre than in agriculture. And let's face it, people don't read the labels and they over-apply. These are the pesticides being used in the areas where lots of people live, work, play, and drink water, and where bees live as well. What the report found is that these uses don't provide benefits to users most of the time, the vast majority of time. And even when you might want to use an insecticide, there are a number of safer alternatives available. So the bill goes after just those two uses. It targets the treated seeds, corn, soybean, and wheat, and the non-ag uses, the high cost, low benefit, you might even say the dumb or wasteful uses of these pesticides, which actually account for about 80 to 90% of the pesticides going into New York's environment. So these, at least from a scientific standpoint, are the low-hanging fruit. The bill doesn't affect other agricultural uses. And to give you a sense of how narrow it is, if you had a corn, soybean, wheat farmer plant an untreated seed and at the same time apply a neonic, that would not be prohibited under the bill. Of course, a farmer would never do that because it's wasteful and doesn't provide benefits. The bill also allows for invasive species treatment, so things like emerald ash borer, hemlock woolly delegate, spotted lanternfly, and allows suspension of the ban to if untreated seed is not available, or if purchasing that untreated seed would cause undue financial hardship. So what can folks do? And this is maybe the most key slide of the whole presentation. So the bill right now passed the Assembly. It is on the floor of the Senate, but the problem is there are slight differences, technical differences between the two bills. Basically, who controls that exemption for seeds, whether it's the governor or whether it's the State Department of Environmental Conservation. There are no real substantive differences between the two bills. They're essentially the same bill. And this is a critical moment. The legislature ends, legislative session ends in 3 weeks. And we want to make sure that this bill gets passed into law, that these differences are resolved. They're very small technical differences. And at this point, the folks that are going to be able to solve them are the Speaker of the Assembly and the President pro tempore of the Senate, Speaker Hasty and President pro tempore Stuart Cousins. So contacting leadership, calls, emails, and for folks interested, I'm happy to send you materials on that. That is a big help. Also contacting your own legislators. Neonics are maybe nowhere else a bigger issue than on Long Island because of the water contamination, the contamination of the aquifer, and of course the effect on marine environments, the Long Island Sound among them. So calling your legislators, asking them to talk to leadership. You know, let's get this bill done. Let's negotiate a compromise between the two language versions, and let's get it across the finish line. A phone call is usually the best thing. A personal email is also a great way to contact. And again, we have materials too, but that personal call or email is always the strongest. We do have a petition, but we have only 3 weeks left in the session. So the petition is helpful, but at this point, you know, we're trying to elevate that pressure directly to folks. Again, some of these other ones too, writing in a letter to the editor. These are things I have in other slides where that's helpful too, but we are in sort of the last 3 weeks. It is crunch time. So with that, I think that is a ton of information. I apologize for speaking for so long. I will stop my share here and take questions.
Thank you so much, Dan. I will remove the spotlight so you can see who is here and open the floor for the interactive part where we can dig a bit deeper. So it's mind-boggling that this particular toxic chemical would be allowed in use, especially, you know, we should have learned something from the Silent Spring ban of the harmful chemicals. I just don't get it. So I see that Marshall Brown with Long Island, do you wanna, wait, let me,
there we go.
Long Island Conservancy.
Yes.
Welcome.
Well, Dan, what you're saying about the Neonics and Long Island really was extremely sobering. This is a relatively new organization, though I've been in environmental advocacy for about 10 years now. But I mean, the implications of this are frankly chilling, and I would really welcome the opportunity to put this all in the form of a post that we can get out and really start to educate the general population about. And that's what we do with the Long Island Conservancy. It's very much grassroots and educating people about what's native and what's not, and getting people to institute sustainable practices such as this. But you know, your presentation was brilliant, and 99% of the people walking around in New York don't know what a neonic is, and I think if we could bring that home, then I think it would be easier to get the sort of laws that we need to have passed. But I really thank you so much for really an enlightening presentation, and it's very sobering. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure entirely. And again, thank you everyone for coming tonight. And I just put my email in the chat. And Hildur, I can also send you some of the materials that we've been sending to other folks. I do have a draft sort of grassroots blast on this with some asks for folks. So if people do have listservs, I'm happy to get you that. You can contact me directly or you can, or Hildur, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I might give you the materials to distribute to other folks if they know you too.
Yes, that's definitely. So Kelly, I want to take the time here to thank Kelly. Kelly is our co-producer here. She's from Landmark on Main Street, and she puts together a resource email following this presentation where we share the recording. And she will, if you send us the information, then we will share that with everyone here and beyond. And in terms of, we'll figure out for our zip code here, who to call. I think Margaret put Assembly Member Carl Heasty. Is that right, Margaret? Did you look it up in the meantime?
Yeah, Speaker Hasty is the Speaker of the Assembly. So I think there's sort of two levels of outreach that are helpful, reaching out directly to leadership, so Hasty and Senator Stewart Cousins, and as well as your own representative, especially if they're a co-sponsor on the bill, and we have a number of co-sponsors on the bill, a number from Long Island, and asking them to go to leadership and say, look, let's resolve this minor technical difference between the two bills. Let's get this done.
Mm-hmm.
Engelbright,
yeah.
Engelbright. And I should note too, Assemblyman Engelbright, a real champion for pollinators. He is the primary sponsor of the bill.
And Kaminsky, is that?
Kaminsky is a co-sponsor. The primary sponsor is Senator Hoylman from Manhattan.
Yeah, and in terms of local action, we could all just not use neonics in daily use, and I've been, and I'm so excited that we have our councilwoman with us still. Marianne Dalamont is here. In terms of regulating, it can be very empowering to make a difference locally before we wait for the top-down trickle effect. What do you think nationwide? What do you think your chances are? I know you work nationwide.
Well, I think you're seeing an increased understanding of what these pesticides are doing. I think with all of these pesticides, it takes a long time for the public. It takes a long time for the science to catch up and a long time for the public to understand what's going on with the science. You are seeing a movement in the US. You saw it first in Europe, and they banned basically all outdoor neonic use in 2018. And so you're starting to see that spread to the United States, again, New Jersey, Maine being some of the first actors. There's a bill in California now that is looking at that, a bill in Connecticut. I might be missing a couple other states. But so there is a growing awareness and movement on these pesticides, but we're already losing time. We're sort of behind the 8 ball. And again, what's almost criminal about these pesticides is that for the most part, the uses that are tearing apart the environment or hollowing it out are the ones that aren't useful, right? It's like taking an antibiotic every day, whether you're going to get sick or not. I mean, it's just really wasteful and really unjustifiable. Oh, and in terms of, and not to talk on, but in terms of removing neonics from your own use, it's challenging because it's not like your label is going to say neonics. It's going to say the chemical name. And unless you have a list of the big 5 neonics and you reference that to each product, okay, wait, it's not imidacloprid, it's not acetamiprid, it's not clothianidin. So it's tricky for the consumer. That's part of the problem. And two, also with localities, because of the way that the state laws are written, local governments are sort of constrained in prohibiting pesticide use. They can prohibit it on public lands, but it's difficult to do much more than that.
And you mentioned they're used on golf courses. That's something we have.
Golf
so
courses,
if we go and advocate on a local golf course and just bring it to their attention, we could do that.
Hilda, I already put it on my list to check with the Parks Department.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and New York is a really at the forefront for this. New York City actually prohibited neonics on public parks along with other synthetic pesticides. So, I mean, there is action on the local level for sure. But, again, we're at a point where we have the science. We're not waiting for the science is in. And, there is a real need to take holistic action just because of how broadly these pesticides do contaminate the environment. And again, how wasteful they are.
Yes, and we have Beth Horn is asking here in the chat, and please unmute if you can, if you want to participate, or simply drop a question in the chat, as we're in the interactive part, the fun part where we all get to see each other. But here is a question I see in the chat. Are there treatments that neutralize neonics in the environment so that the damage can be mitigated? Great question, Beth. Is there anything we can do to clean up?
I'm not aware of any. And just to, again, why neonics are so worrisome is the way they're designed to work. They attach to a receptor site in a nerve and they bind to it permanently and they stimulate the nerve. They're what's known as agonists, right? So they keep stimulating that nerve. So if you see a bee that has been poisoned with neonics, that bee will twitch uncontrollably before becoming paralyzed, right? It eventually overstimulates the nerve until it kills it. So it'll twitch uncontrollably, become paralyzed, and then die. And so there is some belief that neonics work the same way in our nerve cells, that they attach permanently. So the burden of these pesticides builds up over time, right? So you can be exposed to really small amounts, but over a really long period of time, that can add up. And that's sort of what we're seeing, right? Because we know we're chronically exposed. So, and this is a roundabout way to the question, there's no antidote that I know of to that, although I did see a paper recently that mentioned, hey, we might want to think about creating something that could help with the toxic burden here and reverse it. The one good news about neonics compared to DDT are, they hang around for a really long time, sort of like, PFAS, forever chemicals. Neonics, as far as we know, are not forever chemicals. They do break down. So they will start to get out of the environment eventually. So the sooner, they say the first rule about getting out of a hole is to stop digging. And that's exactly the issue we have with neonics. Although I'll note, and this is again, important for Long Island, near the marine, near the water, there was a study in Europe recently that looked at birds, coastal birds, the year after the ban there on neonics, and every bird that they measured in the study had neonics in their feathers. And these are birds that don't eat insects. So they hang around in the environment for a while, but again, the solution is to just stop digging that hole.
I would say that's a no-brainer, especially with the results on mammals and and the public health implications if humans are human-centered. It should be enough that it's killing songbirds, but if we take the effect to us, if David has his hand up, and then we'll get to the questions in the chat. But if you'd like to speak up, we welcome that. We'd love to see you as well. David, can you turn on your camera? And you can raise an electronic hand if you'd like. Otherwise, I'll read the questions in the chat.
Oh, sorry. David, I think you're muted.
David, we can't see you either.
Oh, so you can't hear me or see me. Okay.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Now we hear
excellent.
you.
Okay, great. So there's been a movement in Port Washington to rewild public spaces, rewild our lawns. And the question is, and also to protect our open spaces, to protect our wild spaces. 80% of the peninsula is developed. The remaining 20%, half of it is golf course, and then the other half is wild. So how much space do we need to protect our full diversity of bee species? Will a native plant garden do that effectively, or do we need much larger open spaces?
Well, it's the answer there. I hate to say it, but it's complicated. So, certainly creating more habitat, more forage is almost always beneficial. Maybe not if it's right next to a golf course, because, there's some debate as to whether having floral resources, pollen, nectar, that's soaking up neonics, whether that's really helping or whether that's just sort of a death trap for pollinators. But in the main, it is better to create more habitat, and it is going to depend on the nature of where it's created, right? Is it next to a pesticide source, or is it further away? And what species we're talking about. Honeybees can travel for miles to forage. So, you can set up a beehive in a natural area, but they may be getting their pollen from a contaminated area. So other species don't travel as far. And one thing that's critical about neonics too is that they contaminate the soils, and most bees actually live in the soil. They don't live in hives. They burrow in the soil. And there are studies showing that exposure in the soil can be harmful to them. So again, I know it's not a satisfying answer. It's complicated, but rule of thumb, there's general rules of thumb. Creating more habitat, more native habitat, generally a better thing. Reducing use of pesticides, absolutely. I think across the board is always better.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David, for everything you do for our pollinators. And we have a lot of good questions in the chat. And I'd like to, I'll start with, first, were the neonics mainly made to eliminate bees?
No. So these are all unintended consequences, right? In the same way that DDT was not meant to thin out bald eagle eggs, neonics were not designed to kill bees. They were designed to kill insects, but bees are insects, right? You may be trying to target a pest, but we all have the same basic infrastructure in our body. And actually, this is attacking infrastructure that is so basic to animal life that we have it in our body, right? It's something that we share with bees. And
I see bees as distant relatives.
They are. They absolutely are. And this is proof of it.
It's proof. And it's amazing. My dog agrees. I see a question from Erin. Where can we find a list of the neonics we are likely to find on product labels? So is there like a list we could be looking for these particular chemicals?
I am just going to type it. You can Google it.
And I find
I tried Googling it.
So I just put it in the in the chat. So there are other chemicals that are like, there's nit and pyrum and other stuff that are technically neonics. These are the ones that are going to be used: acetamiprid, clothianidin, dienteffuran, imidacloprid, and thiamethoxam. The ones that you're going to likely see in home products, clothianidin and imidacloprid. Imidacloprid is actually the big one for home products. And it's actually, you see these not only in garden products, you see them in bed bug products, you see them in pet collars. There was actually, if you type in USA Today, neonic pet collars, pet deaths, neonic collars actually have killed a number of pets. I think it's 1,700 and counting. And these are just the reports, right, that EPA gets. You know, that's the tip of the iceberg. So I would watch out too with some of these pesticide soaked pet collars. There have been some issues with them. Oh yeah, and Jen, oh, I'm glad somebody posted Jen's blog. So, oh, thank you, Marianne. Jen she knows this stuff. I wish, I'm just sort of playing a game of telephone when it comes to human health. Jen knows the science and is maybe one of the leading experts on this, because she knows both the scientific literature and the EPA record. And those are the tests that the industry submits to EPA in order to get their pesticide approved. You may not know this, but the way our system works is that the people who have a financial interest in getting that pesticide approved are also the ones that do all the science to show that it's safe. So, you know, that is, you know, obviously a conflict of interest there, but there's a lot of good science there. And like I said, more coming out. Those last 3 studies, I literally just added them to the slide this morning because we're getting in new human health science.
And which corporations are producing neonics mainly? Are there certain?
So lots of them. Again, there's 5 chemicals. Initially, they all were under patent to various corporations. The Bayer Corporation, you know, the folks who make the aspirin, were the biggest producers of neonics at one point in time, but they are now off of patent. So what that means is anybody can make them, and lots of people do. So there are manufacturers all over the place.
I think do we have any more questions? Does anyone want to speak up? We see a long contribution here. If you'd like to speak up, we love that. Makes it feel like we're in the same space here.
I was curious actually about the connection to autism. I mean, it follows the same curve as the other things, it would appear. And if there's anything that'll get people to sit up and take notice, it would be that connection.
Yeah, so the study I'm familiar with linked neonic exposure to autism-like symptoms, and I am not enough of an expert in autism to say whether that is actual autism or not, but there was a significant association there. I think more broadly, what is most harmful about these pesticides, or where the health experts, so a number of health experts have actually written to the governor, they've written to the legislature in support of this bill, and they're increasingly raising alarms about the harms of these pesticides. I think you're going to see that more and more as the science develops. And just recently, I think these have gotten more attention. But the fundamental way in which they work, they're neurotoxic. And the folks that always get hurt the most are the ones that are most vulnerable. In this case is children in the womb, young children. They are the ones with the highest levels of the pesticides in their bodies. That's according to CDC research. And they're the ones that are most vulnerable. The developing brain, it's a symphony, a very complex symphony. And if you throw a neurotoxin in there, the disruption, and we see this in animals, right? So in the animal studies, you can actually see physical changes in rats' brains from exposure to neonics in the womb. The thing that you can't do with rats is say, oh, well, how did this rat do on its second grade math test, right? So there are effects that we can see in animals and effects that we can't, but what we see, the fact that we're seeing physical effects, physical changes to our neurological infrastructure, that is frightening. And there's every reason to expect, again, that these are going to have what they call sort of neurobehavioral impacts.
Thank you.
And there are more holistic approaches like agroecological ways to deal with pests other than chemical, right? More of a sort of a, I don't know if like biodynamic.
Yeah, I mean, and in this case, you know, the answer in most cases is just don't use these, right? Because you're not getting any benefit at all.
Yeah.
So just,
it seems like an easy action step here is just to take them off the shelf. And why is Europe always ahead of us with these things in terms of regulation? I come from Europe, so you know, you can buy things off the shelf in the US that you can't get
more a sense of a cohesive society instead of everybody just doing whatever they want to do. You know, just two different ways of, you know, I mean, it's obvious what needs to be done, but it's always how do we get out of our bubble to really communicate it to the larger public in a way that's meaningful to them.
Yes, I'd like to call on Joanne Young. Now I'm not going to try your last name. You won't have to say mine either.
It's
I see your
shade.
comment. Hello.
Hello. It's Doshade. It's actually Dutch, Dushkota.
Doshade.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I do a blog for Democrats in New York 1, Congressional District New York 1. And we realized with the LIPA situation, trying to create public power, that we wanted to reach out to people besides Democrats. And we created another website. We had a Save LIPA website and we changed it to Connect Long Island. And the first post was actually about this because Maria Hoffman, who is Steve Engelbright's chief of staff, just passed away last week. So we had to write he wrote a eulogy kind of thing. And when I sent it out, someone sent me a link to this and said, oh, do you know that this is happening? And I had used the NRDC stuff in the original post saying this is the action you need to do in Maria's name. But listening to this gave me better information on where to direct people to. And that's the kind of, the reason for the coalition is exactly the fact that you exist and I didn't know about it. And when you look at all the groups in Suffolk County, just in Suffolk, and I think you're in Nassau, no one is talking to each other. You know, you have a whole lot of groups doing a whole lot of different things and there's no communication. And so that's really what we need to create.
Yes, I'd like to really, at Transition Town, that's what we really care about, is collaborating, connecting, and being with other groups. So this is our email and our website, and we're so happy to connect on exactly, it takes all of us right now, right? So I just want to thank you for popping into this space. Who shared with you that we were meeting?
Ryan Madden from the Long Island.
Oh yes,
Coalition.
Wonderful. Yeah. Yes. I think it's so important to have this kind of coalition building as we that's what works in nature is that all the different organs work together. And so thank you.
What people don't realize is that politically on Long Island, and I'm not going to go beyond Long Island, because we're so unique, okay? NOAA just listed us as the #2 hotspot in the country for damage from climate change, okay, that Republicans and Democrats are willing to work together on issues relating to the environment. And if it's one way of getting everybody to actually work in unison, just pick that one topic and say, this is what we need to do to save Long Island. Let's all get together.
This is a topic. This could be a connective tissue topic because it's non-controversial. It's not, the science is clear.
Well, you think that, but they're trying to pass the EPR bill and it's controversial,
Yeah.
And even so, but on Long Island, it was when Steve Engelbright brought it to the floor the last day of session, saying that we should be doing these sorts of things. It was the Republicans who backed him up, because the Long Island Republicans, because they know that waste on Long Island is such a big problem. And once they did, everyone did. And the bill ended up passing like 143-1 or something like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and we care about our waters. I want to acknowledge our water commissioner who is here, Minty Germain, and is addressing the emerging contaminants in our water source. And of course,
yeah, Hildur,
Hi, Mindy.
Hi, Hildur. It's great to be here, and this was an excellent program. And I already wrote in the chat, I look forward to getting the resources and see how, we can help share information through our education as well.
Yeah, and I will definitely get those resources out to Hildur and Kelly. And again, if folks can't wait, you can email me as well. We're in the final stretch now. We got 3 weeks to pass this bill. So, the more voices and support we can get, the better. And when the bill passed, it was somewhat bipartisan in the assembly, and we did get some Republican votes. And I think some of those were from Long Island for the reasons that you all mentioned. It is a concern. There is definitely contamination. Neonics are definitely not the first in the Long Island aquifer, but right now they're among the most detected, and they're not testing even for all of them.
Same with PFAS.
And PFAS too. Yeah.
And a great question, another great question from Beth Horn. So where is the main opposition to this bill? Who is lobbying for the use of neonics?
So in the main Chemistry Council, they're still making money selling these pesticides. Farm Bureau is also opposed, but I think there has been a lot of misinformation about the bill and what is and isn't in it. And the bill has sort of changed over time. So maybe that's part of the confusion, but there was an assembly hearing on this last September, and you had fruit and vegetable growers testifying that neonics were important for, tomatoes or, berries. And you sort of had to scratch your head because the bill doesn't affect any fruit or vegetable uses. So again, I think a lot of the energy here is coming from the Chemistry Council. I think there's misunderstanding. I don't think the Chemistry Council is trying to correct that misunderstanding about what this bill does and doesn't do. So we're just trying to get the word out. Because, at the end of the day, farmers need bees. New York is a top apple producer, and we know there's actually research showing that apples, blueberries, cherries are pollinator limited nationwide. So whether that apple farmer knows it, blueberry farmer knows it or not, they're seeing lower yields already because there are fewer bees in the environment.
Wow. And do we have any more questions, comments, concerns? Again, D. Raichel.
Yeah, so it's in the old country it was Raichel, as long as we're doing
Raichel.
Yeah, it was Raichel in the old country. New country, my grandparents always said Raichel, like New
Raichel.
Raichel.
Yeah.
So just to make it confusing.
Well, his email is DRAICHEL at nrdc.org. And I really appreciate that you're doing this and that you're giving us your time tonight, Dan. It's really been enlightening and gives us also something to do about it. And I think, you know, we like, as grassroots enthusiasts and volunteers and activists, we like to do something doable. So now we can just hit the phone lines and do the best we can to push it through on our end.
Well, thank you all so much.
Oh,
again.
wait, we have a hand. Can we have one more question?
Sure.
Hi, I just
Hi.
did a search of New York State Birds and Bees Protection Act, and right away it gave the Senate bill number and the Assembly bill number, and I clicked on each one, and right away it said, do you support this bill? And I could vote yes and submit it to the appropriate people. So it was very simple to take a step and show our support of this.
Yeah, that's another easy way to do it, right? There are those buttons on the website, so that's helpful as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Beth.
Hi, Hildur. I'm sorry I wasn't participating. My husband has COVID, and although I don't have it, I look like I have it, so I'm not going on video. But I just wanted to ask one last question quickly. Can you point us to the research that finds the connection between these chemicals and autism? Can we actually access the data on this?
So somebody put in Jen's blog in the, and let me just make sure that she has it. So Jen's blog, and you could type in Jen Sass brain sperm, and that'll bring it up. And let me just look to make sure, because she has all of the links in it too. It's a really great blog. Yes, okay, so it's Keel et al. 2014. So just right, if you find Jen's, why don't I just put it in the chat again for convenience. So go to Jen's blog, and then you can just do a search for autism. Again, I don't want to mischaracterize this because I'm not an expert on the disease, but definitely go to that study and you can see the research.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I thought it was excellent. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you all. It was a pleasure speaking.
Yes, and thank you, Beth, for your contribution tonight, and happy healing to your husband. There's an uptick over here of this new variant. I hope you don't have to get it.
I hope so. Thanks, Hildur.
I put a link here. Emma, is this the correct one for the Senate? Assembly Bill A7429A, is that?
That's the Assembly number.
And so we can actually tonight, if you click on this link, it takes you, and it will be in the follow-up resources as well. But you can click yes and fill your information in directly. Thank you for this. And any burning desires, questions, anything finally here before we part and each go back to our evening? I don't see any hands, electronic or otherwise. And with that, I would like to thank you for sharing your time with us and on this important topic. I would like to support the ban on neonics nationwide.
Well, thanks, Hildur, and thanks everyone again for having me in the landmark as well, and looking forward to staying in touch with folks.
Thank you.